Gabriel Hayes was a night shift janitor pulling 16-hour days to keep his asthmatic daughter breathing and a roof over their heads. One night, his manager handed him an unusual order: clean the executive boardroom on the 50th floor, but never touch the CEO's private office. Gabriel followed the rule until he found the door unlatched, light spilling out from underneath. He pushed it open, expecting an empty room. Instead, he found Charlotte Lane, the company's untouchable CEO, alone and struggling to fasten a rigid medical brace around her ribs, her body covered in deep bruises she had hidden from everyone. She did not scream. She did not call security. She just stared at him cold and calculating and told him to leave. Gabriel spent the night certain his career was over. So why the next morning was his badge still active? And why was she asking for him by name? The bus dropped Gabriel Hayes 3 blocks from the Apex Holdings tower at 7:45, and he walked the rest with his collar turned up against a wind that smelled like rain and diesel. The building rose ahead of him, 60 floors of black glass that caught the last of the evening light and threw it back cold. From the street, it looked like something that had been poured, rather than built seamless, and humming a monument to people who would never know his name. He badged through the loading entrance, where the air changed from city to bleach, and rode the service elevator down to the basement to clock in. His knees announced themselves on the first flight of stairs he took afterward, the way they always did now, a dull complaint that had started somewhere around his 38th birthday and never fully left. He was not an old man. He only felt like one at the end of a double, and he was always at the end of a double. 16 hours had become ordinary in the way that bad weather becomes ordinary, something you stopped naming and simply lived inside. The 42nd floor was his, had been his for 2 years. He knew its rhythms the way a farmer knows a field which conference room would be a disaster after the sales team used it, which bathroom stall flooded if you breathed on the handle, which of the analysts left coffee rings on the glass, and which one apologized for it the next morning with a sheepish wave. There was a comfort in that knowledge, a small dignity. The people who worked the day shift saw a man in gray coveralls and looked through him as though he were one more fixture in the building. But Gabriel had decided long ago that being unseen was its own kind of armor. You could carry a great deal if nobody was watching you do it. What he carried mostly was Hazel. She was 7 with her mother's stubborn chin and a laugh too big for her body, and her lungs had been the problem since the night she was born, too early in a hospital that still sent him envelopes. The asthma had a personality. It liked cold air and dusty rooms and the changing of the seasons, and it didn't care that the rescue inhaler cost what it cost, or that the prescription had to be refilled before the old one ran dry, because a child who could not breathe could not wait for payday. Gabriel had learned to hear an attack coming the way other men learned to read a sky. The high, thin whistle on the exhale, the shoulders climbing toward the ears. He kept a spare inhaler in his locker, another in the glove box of a car he could barely afford to insure, and a running total in his head of how many days stood between him and the rent. That number was 4. The rent was late on the 1st, and it was the 28th. He had a high school diploma folded in a drawer somewhere, and a set of references from a warehouse that had closed, and that was the whole of his leverage in the world. So when the night manager came looking for him a little after 10, Gabriel's first instinct was the one he always had, which was to make himself useful before anyone could decide he wasn't. Dale Foster was a heavy sweating man who managed the cleaning contract for the upper floors and wore his lanyard like a badge of rank. He found Gabriel reloading a cart on 42 and did not bother with a greeting. "You're off your floor tonight," Dale said. 50th, boardroom in the executive hallway, full service. Dust glass floors, the works. They've got people coming in early. Gabriel set down the roll of liners he was holding. The 50th floor was not a place men like him went. It was the floor, with its own elevator code and its own air. The floor the day crew spoke about the way sailors spoke about deep water, with a respect that was mostly avoidance. "That's executive," Gabriel said. "Don't they have their own? Their own service is out 2 people, and the rest are slammed." Dale wiped his neck with the back of his hand. "It's one night. You do good work. That's why it's you. Don't make it a thing." He held out a fresh keycard, the plastic still cool, and Gabriel took it. "One rule, and I need you to actually hear me on this. You clean the boardroom and the hall. You do not for any reason go into the corner office. That's Ms. Lane's. It stays locked. It stays shut. You don't so much as breathe on the handle. Anybody asks, you weren't near it. Understand?" The name landed in Gabriel's chest before the warning did. Everyone in the building knew the name in the way that everyone in a country knows the name of the person printed on its money. Charlotte Lane had taken Apex Holdings when it was bleeding and turned it into the kind of company that bought other companies. Her face was on the wall in the lobby and on the cover of magazines that Gabriel had only ever seen in the recycling. She was not a person to him. She was a weather system. The idea that her office sat at the end of a hallway he was about to mop felt less like an opportunity than a dare. "Understood," Gabriel said. "Say it back." "I clean the boardroom and the hall. I don't touch the corner office." Dale nodded, satisfied, and was already turning away. "Cart stays up there when you're done. Badge yourself out by 4. And then he was gone, and Gabriel was alone with a key card that could open a part of the world that had never once opened for him. The 50th floor, when the elevator finally released him into it, was quieter than any place he had ever cleaned. The 42nd floor had a hum to it, the white noise of servers and vents, and the building breathing. Up here, the silence had weight the way silence does in a church or a courtroom. The boardroom ran along the eastern wall, a single table of dark wood, long enough to seat 20, and beyond the glass, the city spread out below, in a grid of lights that did not look real, that looked like a circuit board somebody had switched on. Gabriel stood there for a moment, longer than he should have, taking it in before he went to work. He was good at the work, and there was relief in that in the parts of his life where the rules were clean. He polished the long table until the city doubled itself in the surface. He wiped down the fingerprints on the glass walls, the smears of a dozen hands that had pointed at numbers he would never see. He emptied the bins which held the small archaeology of powerful people, torn agendas, a snapped pen, a coffee cup with lipstick on the rim, and he ran the buffer over the floor in slow, overlapping passes until it shone. It took him most of 2 hours, and by the end of it, his knees were singing and his shirt was stuck to his back, and he had not once looked toward the hallway where the corner office sat behind its door. He told himself he wasn't going to look. But when he wheeled the cart down the executive hall to do the floor, that part was in his orders. The hall, all of it. The door at the end of it was not shut. It was open. Not wide. A hand's width, no more, and from the gap, a long blade of warm light lay across the dark marble like something spilled. The rest of the floor was lit by the cold, recessed bulbs the building used after hours. But that light was different. Lamplight gold, the light of a room where someone meant to stay a while. Gabriel stopped the cart and stood very still, and the building hummed somewhere far below him. And he understood that he was being given a choice that no one would ever know he had been given. The reasonable thing was to clean the hall up to the threshold, and no farther. To leave the strip of floor in front of that door for tomorrow's crew, or for never, and to badge out at 4, with his rule unbroken. But the door was open, and Dale had said, the office stayed shut, stayed locked, and a door that was neither of those things was a door that something had gone wrong with. A light left on, a cleaner before him who had cut a corner, or and this was the thought that moved his hand, someone inside who was not supposed to be after midnight on a floor that was meant to be empty. If he left it, and the office had been left open and unsecured on his watch, that was a problem with his name on it. If he closed it himself, he had to touch the handle he had been told not to breathe on. Either way, the rule and the reality had stopped agreeing with each other, and Gabriel had spent his whole life in the gap between rules and reality. And he knew that gap was where men like him got blamed. He left the cart in the hall. He crossed the last 10 feet on quiet shoes. And because some part of him needed to know what he was deciding before he decided it, he put 2 fingers against the door and pushed it open another few inches enough to see. Charlotte Lane was standing beside her desk with her back half to him, and she was not the woman from the wall in the lobby. The blazer was gone, draped over the chair. Her blouse hung open and loose around her waist, and she was holding a contraption of pale medical plastic and steel against her own ribs, with one hand, while the other fumbled at a strap. She could not reach her arm, trembling with the effort of an angle her body would not give her. And where the brace did not cover her, along the side of her beneath the line of her ribs, the skin was a map of bruising, deep and old and layered, violet going green at the edges, the kind of injury that did not happen in an afternoon, and did not heal in one either. She had her jaw set against the pain in a way that told him she had been setting it for a long time, that this was a thing she did alone, every night in a room she made certain stayed locked. He must have made a sound, a breath, the door his own heart. Because she went still, the strap slipping from her fingers, and she turned her head and she saw him. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. He waited for the scream, for the lunge at the phone on the desk, for the word that would bring security up from the lobby and end his employment and possibly his liberty. It would have been the natural thing. A powerful woman, half-dressed, her most guarded secret, laid bare in front of a stranger, in coveralls at midnight. It did not come. Instead, Charlotte Lane straightened, slowly pressing the brace to her side, with a flat composure that was somehow more frightening than any scream. And she looked at him the way a person looks at a number on a page, measuring it, deciding what to do with it. Her eyes were dry and very clear, and they moved over him once, taking in the cart in the hall. Behind him, the keycard clipped to his chest, the gray of his uniform, the whole sum of him, and Gabriel had the distinct sense of being weighed by someone who had weighed a great many things and been wrong about almost none of them. "Get out," she said. Her voice did not shake. "And forget what you saw." Gabriel got out. He pulled the door to behind him without touching the handle more than he had to, and he wheeled the cart back up the hall with his pulse loud in his ears, and he badged out at 3 in the morning instead of 4, because he could not stand to be on that floor a minute longer. The whole way down in the service elevator, he stared at his own reflection in the steel and waited to feel the future arrive. Gabriel did not sleep that night, or what was left of it. He sat at the kitchen table of the apartment with the lights off and the city throwing its orange glow across the ceiling, and he listened to Hazel breathing in the next room, the small, even tide of it easy for once, and he ran the arithmetic of disaster. If he was fired, the references were gone. If the references were gone, the next job was longer in coming, and the rent was already 4 days from due, and the inhaler in the bathroom cabinet had maybe 9 doses left in it. He had seen something he was not meant to see, and the woman who had let him see it owned a building full of lawyers. He had heard stories about what happened to people who learned things about people like Charlotte Lane. None of the stories ended with the small man keeping his job. He went in the next evening because there was nothing else to do but go in. He half expected the keycard to flash red at the loading entrance and a guard to step out of the shadows with a clipboard and a practiced apology. Instead, the light went green, the door clicked, and the air turned to bleach the way it always did. He clocked in. He loaded his cart on the 42nd floor. He waited for the axe, and the axe did not fall, and somehow, the waiting was worse than the falling would have been. It was nearly 11 when the call came down. Not from Dale, but from a number Gabriel did not recognize, routed through the building phone on his floor. A woman's voice, crisp and impersonal, the voice of someone who scheduled the days of important people for a living. "Mr. Hayes," she said. "Ms. Lane would like to see you. 50th floor. Now please." The same elevator. The same heavy silence when it opened. But the corner office door stood wide this time, the lamplight gold across the marble, and Charlotte Lane sat behind her desk, fully dressed, the blazer back on her hair, smoothed her face, arranged into the composure he had seen on the wall in the lobby. Only her stillness gave her away. She held herself the way a person holds a full glass they are afraid to spill. "Close the door," she said. "Sit." He sat. The chair was worth more than his car. "You didn't tell anyone." It was not a question, but she let it hang there as though it were watching his face for the lie. "No, ma'am." "Why not?" Gabriel turned the answer over before he gave it. "Wasn't mine to tell." Something moved behind her eyes, that an interest quickly closed off. She opened a folder on the desk and turned it so he could see. Though he did not look down, he kept his eyes on her because it seemed the more honest thing. 6 weeks ago, a helicopter I was riding in went down in a field outside the city, she said, in the flat tone of a woman reading a report about a stranger. The pilot was killed. I was not. 3 ribs, a fractured collarbone, a hairline crack in the orbital bone they tell me was a matter of millimeters. The official account is that I was not on the aircraft. The official account is that I took a car. Her hand rested flat on the folder. Do you know what happens to a company this size when its chief executive is photographed, broken on a stretcher, Mr. Hayes weeks before the largest merger in its history closes? He said nothing because he understood he was not meant to answer. The board has men on it who have wanted my chair for a decade. Richard Mercer chief among them. A weakness, a real one, a visible one, is all they need. A vote of no confidence dressed up as concern for my health. They would have me out, and the merger dead, and themselves richer inside of a month. Her jaw set in the way he had seen the night before, the way of someone who had been holding a great weight a long time. So I do not get to be injured. I get to be perfect for 8 more weeks, in a brace in front of cameras, in front of 40 people in a boardroom, who are watching me for any sign that the rumors are true. That's why you sent for me, Gabriel said slowly. I'm the one person up here who already knows. You're the one person who already knows. She agreed, who has every reason in the world to keep his mouth shut and nothing to gain by opening it. She looked at him with that weighing look again. I had you checked. A daughter, 7 years old, a medical condition that costs money you don't have, a high school education, and a job you keep by being invisible. You are Mr. Hayes, almost perfectly designed to be discreet. It should have stung being summarized like that, reduced to a list of pressure points. But there was no cruelty in how she said it, only accuracy. And Gabriel had spent too long being looked through to mind, very much being looked at. I have a doctor who comes at night, she went on. A driver I trust. What I don't have is someone to be near me through the day who can read when I'm about to fail and get me out of a room before it shows. Someone the board won't think twice about a man in a uniform carrying a coat opening a door. Nobody looks at the help. A thin, humorless line touched her mouth. You said it yourself. It wasn't yours to tell. I'm offering to make it worth more than that. Offering what? $3,000 a week, Charlotte said. Paid privately off the company books. Full medical coverage, the real kind. The kind with no ceiling for you and your daughter, beginning immediately. In exchange, you leave the cleaning contract. You come to work for me, and you never speak of what you saw in this office, or what you will see in the weeks ahead. To anyone. Ever. She folded her hands. That's the whole of it. There's no fine print I'm hiding. Take it or don't, but decide tonight because I don't have time to ask twice. $3,000 a week. He made a little under $900 for 80 hours. The number did not feel real. It felt like a thing said in another language. And under it, quieter and far heavier, the other word coverage, the real kind, the kind with no ceiling, and behind that word, Hazel's face, and the nights he had counted doses, and the envelopes from the hospital he had stopped opening. A wiser man might have asked what it would cost him in some currency he couldn't yet see. Gabriel only thought of his daughter's lungs. "My daughter's coverage," he said. "That starts whether or not the rest of this works out. That's the one thing I won't gamble." For the first time, Charlotte Lane looked at him as though he had surprised her. "It starts tomorrow," she said. "Regardless, you have my word, and I'm told that still means something." She slid a single sheet across the desk. "Then we have an arrangement." He signed his name beneath hers. The new life did not fit him, and for a while it did not pretend to. He kept the uniform because that was the point of him, the gray coveralls that made him furniture. The cart he sometimes still pushed for show. But underneath the disguise, the work was nothing like the work he knew. He learned the geography of her days, the back routes through the building she used, so she would not have to stand too long in a lobby. He learned to carry a coat in a way that left his arm free to catch her. He learned most of all to read her, because she would not tell him when she was failing would die before she told him, and so it became his job to know without being told. He learned that she went pale at the corners of the mouth a half-minute before the pain crested, and that when she set down whatever she was holding and rested 2 fingers very lightly on the edge of a table, she was buying herself time, and that this was the signal to find a reason, a phone call, a car, a forgotten document to move her out of the room. He learned that she took the stairs when the elevator was crowded, because she could not bear to be pressed against anyone, and that the brace bit worst when she had to sit through a long meeting, and that she would rather endure an hour of agony in a boardroom than be seen reaching for the small white pills she kept in a tin in her bag. She was not grateful, and she did not pretend to be. She corrected him constantly, his posture, the way he held a door too long, and made it obvious the moment he hovered too close and turned invisible help into visible concern. "You're guarding me," she said, once low and sharp in a corridor full of executives. "Stand like a man waiting for a bus. You're terrible at this." He was terrible at it. He got better. He had spent his whole life learning to be unseen. Now he was being paid to be unseen on purpose, and that, at least, was a skill he already owned. They struck against each other constantly, the way 2 stones in a stream do, because they were built from opposite things. She had been raised by money and ran on control. He had been raised by the lack of it and ran on endurance. She gave orders and expected silence. He had opinions and increasingly the nerve to voice them. When she pushed through a 14-hour day on 3 of the white pills and a single glass of water, it was Gabriel who put a sandwich on the desk in front of her without a word, and Charlotte who looked at it like an insult, and Gabriel who said evenly, "You hired me to keep you standing. You can't stand on nothing." She did not thank him. She ate it. It was in its way the first thing they agreed on. He told her almost nothing about himself, and she did not ask. He kept Hazel in a separate country of his mind, walled off from the tower and the brace and the $3,000, because that was the part of him that was still entirely his own. In the mornings, after the long nights, he picked his daughter up from the neighbor, who watched her and made her breakfast, and listened to her breathe and the easy tide of it. Now the inhalers refilled. The specialist appointment finally booked was the one good thing the arrangement had bought, and he guarded it more carefully than he guarded anything Charlotte Lane owned. The party was in the 3rd week in a glass house in the hills that belonged to one of the men whose company Apex was about to swallow. Charlotte had to be there, had to be radiant and untouchable and whole for 4 hours in heels, in front of 200 people who were watching the merger close in real time. Gabriel stood at the edges in a borrowed dark jacket that made him look almost like a guest, and he watched her work the room the way a surgeon watches a patient on a table counting the cost of every smile. She was magnificent, and she was lying with her whole body, and only he could see what it took. The way she shifted her weight off her bad side every few minutes. The pallor that crept into the corners of her mouth around the 2nd hour. He brought her water she could pretend was something stronger. He cut conversations short with murmured reminders of calls that did not exist. Twice he got her to a quiet hall to let her stand against a wall for 90 seconds breathing, before she put the face back on and walked out again. By the time the car brought them back down the hill to her own house, well after midnight, she had nothing left. She made it through her own front door into the wide, cold foyer, with its marble and its single low light, and there, finally, with no one watching but him, she stopped lying. Her knees went. It was fast, a buckling, a sharp inhale that was almost a cry, and Gabriel was already moving, had been half a step from her all night, and he caught her under the arms before she reached the floor. She was lighter than he expected, and shaking all over, her composure gone so completely that for a moment she was just a person in terrible pain, gripping his forearm hard enough to leave marks. The brace she got out through her teeth. I can't! It's into the bone! Get it off!" He lowered her to sitting on the bottom step of the stairs and knelt in front of her. His hands were not steady either, but they knew the device by now. He had watched the night doctor work it enough times. He found the straps along her side beneath the open blazer and worked them loose one at a time. Careful talking. Low the whole while. Easy. Almost there, breathe out for me. And when the rigid shell finally came away from her ribs, she made a sound. He had never heard from her. A long, broken exhale of pure relief, and all the rigid control went out of her at once. She sagged forward. And because he was there, and because there was nothing left in her to hold her up, she let her head come to rest against his shoulder. He went very still. He could feel her breathing ragged and slowing against the side of his neck. He could feel the heat of her, the tremor working its way out of her muscles, the place where the untouchable woman from the wall in the lobby simply stopped existing, and a person took her place. Exhausted. Hurt alone, in a way that had nothing to do with the 200 people who had wanted her attention an hour before. He did not put his arm around her. He understood somehow that to do so would be to take something. But he did not move away either, and he let her stay, and he held the weight of her, the way he held everything quietly without being asked. "You can't keep doing this," he said, finally, very low. 5 more weeks of nights like this'll put you in a hospital, and then they win anyway. Then I'll be in a hospital in 5 weeks. Her voice was muffled against his shoulder, worn down to something almost human. Not tonight, he should have argued. He didn't. He stayed where he was, kneeling on the marble of a house that cost more than every place he'd ever lived, put together with the most powerful woman he had ever met, resting the whole of her exhaustion against him, and he felt the thing he had been so careful about begin to give way, the clean, simple line he had drawn on the day he signed his name. The line that said she was the employer and he was the help, and the distance between them was the whole arrangement. The line did not break that night, but it bent, and both of them in the long silence of that foyer knew that it had. The drawing fell out of his pocket on a Tuesday in the back of the car and changed everything. It was the 5th week, and the merger had a closing date now 11 days out, which meant Charlotte's calendar had compressed into a single unbroken sheet of meetings, and Gabriel's days had stretched to match hers. He had taken to carrying things for her, the small administrative weight that other people would have spilled to assistants, because the fewer people in the room, the safer her secret stayed. So he had her tablet and her folder, and a spare set of the pills in his jacket when he reached across the seat to hand her the day's schedule, and the folded square of paper came with it, slid loose, and dropped onto the leather between them. He saw it land, and his stomach dropped with it. He reached, but she was closer. Charlotte picked it up before he could say anything, and unfolded it the way a person unfolds something out of reflex before deciding whether they're allowed to, and then she went still in a way that had nothing to do with the brace. It was a child's drawing, a house with too many windows, a sun with a face, 2 stick figures holding hands in front of it, a big one in gray, and a small one with a wild scribble of brown hair. Across the top, in the careful, unsteady block, letters of a 7-year-old, it said, Me and Daddy. In the corner, smaller, a third figure had been added in different ink, a tall woman in a long, dark coat, standing a little apart from the other two. And beside her, a single word Hazel had clearly asked someone how to spell: lady. "Who is this?" Charlotte said. It came out quiet and not as a demand. Gabriel reached over and took it back gently and folded it along its worn creases, and for a moment he weighed the wall he had kept around this part of himself for 5 weeks, the separate country he had refused to let her into. But the wall had already come down in that foyer 2 weeks before, when she had let her whole weight rest on his shoulder, and a man cannot pretend a thing is hidden after the other person has already seen it fall. "My daughter," he said. "Hazel. She draws me one of these about once a week. There's a stack of them on the refrigerator." He smoothed the fold flat against his knee. "She's been asking about you. Not by name, she doesn't know your name. She knows there's a lady I work for now, and that the lady is the reason she got to see the lung doctor and the reason she has the inhaler that doesn't run out. So she put you in the picture." His mouth tugged not quite a smile. "She's been wondering what you look like. I told her you wear a lot of dark coats." Charlotte looked at the folded paper in his hands, as though it were written in a language she had once known and forgotten. "You've never mentioned her," she said. 5 weeks. You've caught me dressed, me lied, for me put me back together, off the floor of my own house. And you've never once told me you had a child waiting at home." "You never asked," Gabriel said. There was no accusation in it, and it didn't seem like it belonged here. This, he gestured at the car, the tower sliding past the window, the whole machinery of her life. "This isn't her world. I keep her out of it on purpose. It's the only part of me you didn't buy." He had not meant it to land hard, but he watched it land. Something crossed her face quick and unguarded the look of a woman who had spent so long being a weather system that she had forgotten she was also a person someone could fail to tell things to. She had built her life out of leverage. She had said as much that first night when she laid out the list of his pressure points with such clean accuracy. And here was a man who had been holding a far heavier thing than any secret of hers, every single night quietly without once setting it on her desk to be weighed. "How bad is it?" she said. "The asthma, truly, truly." He let out a breath. "There were nights before this job I sat at the kitchen table counting how many doses were left in the canister, like counting money, because that's what it was. If she had a bad spell on the wrong week, the week before payday, I'd be deciding between the medicine and the lights." He said it without drama because it had never been a drama to him. It had only been the math. "She's 7. She thinks the worst thing that can happen is being out of breath at recess. She doesn't know I was scared. That's the job. You keep them from knowing you were scared." The car moved through traffic. Charlotte looked out the window for a while, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. Some piece of the executive had stepped back, and the woman who had rested her head on his shoulder had come forward. "That's what you've been doing for me," she said. It was not a question. "The whole arrangement. You've been keeping me from being seen scared. I thought I'd hired discretion. I'd actually hired a man who already knew how to do the hardest thing I needed, because he'd been doing it for years for someone who mattered more." She turned the idea over. "I built my entire defense out of finding what people couldn't afford to lose. You're the only person near me who spent his life protecting what he couldn't afford to lose. I didn't understand the difference until right now." Gabriel didn't have an answer for that, so he gave her the only honest one he had. "She's the reason I took it, not the 3,000. Her lungs. You could have offered me 1/10 of it, and I'd have signed as long as the coverage was real." "I know," Charlotte said. "That's why I made the coverage the part I'd never take back. I knew it was the only thing that would hold you." A faint, tired honesty came into her face. "I'm good at finding the one thing. I'm not always proud of it." She gave him the Saturday off. It was the first full day he had not worked in 5 weeks, and she did not phrase it as a favor. She phrased it as an order, which he had come to understand was how she gave the things she could not say plainly. "Take your daughter somewhere with grass," she told him on the Friday night, signing something without looking up. "The closing is locked. I have my doctor and my driver, and 48 hours where nobody needs me to stand up straight. If I fall down this weekend, I'll do it where you don't have to catch me. Go be her father in the daylight for once." So on Saturday, Gabriel took Hazel to the park by the river, the one with the wide green field, and the playground, and the cart that sold the soft ice cream she loved. And he watched his daughter run in the open air for 2 hours without the whistle coming into her breath, and it undid something in his chest that had been clenched so long he'd stopped feeling it. She made him push her on the swing until his arms ached. She found a caterpillar and named it, and grieved when it would not come home with them. She asked at one point, sticky-handed, and squinting up at him in the sun, whether the lady from his work was nice. Gabriel thought about it. "I think she's been alone a long time," he said. "I think she's nicer than she lets people see." "You should bring her here," Hazel decided with the total authority of a 7-year-old. "There's grass and ice cream." He laughed and said maybe, and did not think she would remember it, and did not think much would come of it. But that night, after Hazel was asleep, his phone lit up with a message from a number he knew. How was the grass? He looked at it for a moment, this small, dry joke from a woman who did not make jokes, and he understood that the wall between his two countries had not so much come down as it had grown a door. "Good for the lungs," he wrote back. "Both of ours." The merger closed on a Thursday morning, 11 days later, in the boardroom on the 50th floor, with 40 people around the long table Gabriel had once polished, until the city doubled in its surface. He was in the room in the dark jacket now rather than the coverall standing against the wall with a folder he did not need, because she had asked him to be there, and because by then there was no question of him being anywhere she was not. He watched her sit through 3 hours in the brace without showing a flicker of it. He watched Richard Mercer watch her from across the table, the heavy patient man who had spent 6 weeks looking for the crack, leaning forward each time she rose or sat, waiting for the wince that would hand him her chair. It never came. She had learned with Gabriel half a step away the whole time how to rise from a chair as though it cost nothing. The wince stayed inside her, where only he could see it, and Mercer in the end had nothing to vote on but a deal that had made everyone in the room richer. When the signatures were done and the handshakes started, Charlotte caught Gabriel's eye across the room for half a second. No smile, nothing anyone else would have read. And he understood that they had won. The thing she had broken 3 ribs to protect was safe. The board had not deposed her. The story stayed buried. And the strange contract between the CEO and the man in gray had against every odd held all the way to the end. She took the brace off for good 2 weeks after that, when the doctor finally cleared the ribs, and she told Gabriel about it, the way she'd tell him the weather over coffee in the corner office mid-sentence, as though it were nothing. But he saw what it meant. She moved differently afterward. She stood straighter without the steel, and she also stood easier, like a woman who had set down a weight she'd been certain she would carry forever. 6 months after the night he had pushed open a door he'd been told not to touch, Gabriel Hayes drove home from the tower in a car that did not rattle. It was a company car, now quiet and smooth, and the title on the badge clipped to his visor said, Operations Liaison, which was a polite invention Charlotte had built to give a man with a high school diploma, a real desk on the 49th floor, and a salary that no longer had the word weekly attached to it like a leash. He had an office with a window. He still did, in the truest sense, the same job he'd been hired for. He stayed near her. He read the room. He carried the weight nobody saw, but he did it now as a man with a name on a door, and the building that had once looked through him had learned to nod when he passed. He thought about that sometimes on the drive. About the first night the bus, 3 blocks out the rent, 4 days from due the 9 doses left in the canister. about how close the whole of it had come to going another way. How a door left open a hand's width had turned out to be the hinge his entire life swung on. He did not believe in much, but he had come to believe that he had made the right choice, and the only second he'd had to make it, when he could have backed away and kept his rule and lost everything that mattered, and instead had pushed the door and seen a frightened woman, and decided without knowing he was deciding to keep her secret, because it wasn't his to tell. He was at a red light on the bridge when his phone buzzed in the cup holder. He glanced down at it. "It's a good evening for the park," the message said. "The grass kind. I'm told there's an ice cream cart that's essential to the whole operation. If a certain expert is available, I'd like an introduction. Below it a second line." She put me in a drawing. "The least I can do is exist." Gabriel read it twice, and then a laugh came up out of him, low and surprised, and lighter than anything he'd let himself feel. In years, the laugh of a man who has been bracing against the next disaster for so long that he's forgotten the muscles can do anything else. 6 months ago, the city outside his windshield had been a thing that took from him a place of late rent and counted doses and a tower full of people who didn't know his name. It did not look like that anymore. The lights coming on across the water looked for once like just lights. He typed back with one thumb while the signal was still red. "She'll want to know if you like the chocolate or the vanilla. There's a right answer." The reply came before the light changed. "Then I'll defer to the expert. Tell her I'm bringing the appetite." The light went green. Gabriel set the phone down, and he did not pull away right off because for a second, he just sat there at the front of the line on the bridge, with the river going gold beneath him, and his daughter waiting 2 miles ahead, and a text from Charlotte Lane on the seat beside him, and he let himself have the whole shape of it. The daylight, Saturdays, the inhaler that didn't run out the office with the window, the woman who had learned to ask instead of buy, the small, wild-haired girl who had drawn all 3 of them holding hands in front of a house with too many windows before any of them had known it would come true. Then someone tapped a horn behind him gentle, and he lifted a hand in apology and drove on to go pick up Hazel, who would be at the window watching for the headlights, who would want to know the second he walked in whether the lady was really finally coming to see the grass. He would tell her yes. He would tell her the lady was bringing her appetite, and that they'd need to settle the chocolate or vanilla question once and for all, and that some doors, it turned out, were worth opening, even when somebody told you not to. The city slid past, quiet and ordinary, and no longer afraid, and Gabriel Hayes drove home through it, with both hands easy on the wheel.